to a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Umaimah here. You're the CEO of Opel Security. You created this company, and it has a really good niche. I mean, you're helping organizations make sure that all their classified, sensitive, secure information is kept that way, and only the right people have access to it. And it's something that's been adopted by a lot of different, incredible companies out there. And today, especially, I mean, you have to really make sure that everything, that you have in your organization is really tightened up. And we've heard about the types of hacks that happen. You've heard about some of these issues that occur, and you're helping be at the forefront of preventing those issues that have happened to companies, unfortunately. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben.
Awesome. So just kind of going back to the beginning, like you've been interested in cryptography for quite some time. You've been interested in technology and entrepreneurship. How did these passions of yours kind of come together into building your company? And when did you decide I want to do this with my life?
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty organic story. I don't think I ever set out to be a founder. I spent probably most of my childhood hoping I'd become a math professor. And I'd say that, like, from my experience, most entrepreneurs have this like kind of twin set of characteristics of both being really hard to manage, but they also really, really like to be held accountable for their own decisions. You're kind of like, it's like being very high agency. You're like the entrepreneur of your own life. And I think over my career, I found that I would kind of like repeatedly run into scenarios where I was like, oh God, I just want to solve this problem, and I want to like just do it. And I don't want people to tell me how to do it, but I want them to tell me if it's bad at the end, and sort of own that. And so kind of specifically in security, it's interesting. I didn't set out to sort of be a security founder. I did do some cryptography back in college. It's fascinating. It's mostly just like pure math. It's very different from actually being a security vendor, but it's a nice lens to view breaches through, because I think you get this unique perspective. We have all of this like incredible like abstract technology, and it's still not fixing problems. And so specifically for access, at various points in my career, whether it was in DC or whether it was at startups or slightly bigger companies or open source, you kind of see this duality. You'd see this like issue of like, we have really good engineers, we have really good technology, we have really good like abstract understanding of like how things are secure, and things keep happening, and we're sort of like ostriches with our heads in the sand. And for me, like the kind of breaking point hit actually at my last startup. I was primarily working on data engineering. I worked with a lot of operations and security teams because we were building like employer-sponsored healthcare. We were in a regulated environment. We had these big customers, and our internal access control like needed to be Loctite, and there was nothing on the market. And I got so frustrated eventually, like over one Thanksgiving break, I started just like trying to hack something together basically. But the really interesting thing was like seeing that internal build versus buy cycle, seeing that it wasn't just a technology problem, seeing that there was like a really real niche and a fit. I don't know, it almost like just felt like it came to a head, and I couldn't ignore it. So I ended up just leaving the job without a plan and telling myself like, I'm just going to sit. I'm at the point in my career where like, if I don't try and think about this problem, I'm probably going to regret it. And it was almost like, yeah, you just like, it's like, when you get obsessed with something, like you kind of like follow your nose a little bit. And because I had that background of having done more sort of like theoretical security, I also had this like kind of like conviction that like this wasn't just like it's a really hard problem to solve, and we're not just there yet. It was like, no, we've figured out some really, really tough stuff. There's something more fundamental missing. And so like that was a lot of like what the original energy was. It was like, this needs to exist, this needs to be built, it can be built in a way that can scale. And when we finally GA'd and started selling to other customers, like I found there were similarities in their stories. A lot of our early customers, it was like, oh yeah, we went through this too. And we also like just hit this wall, and we were like, there has to be something, got frustrated, built something internally. So it was almost like, there was a lot of like kind of just sticking to that belief that if something like this happens to me, it must have happened to other people. And I don't know whether it was timing or luck, but really just doubling down on that conviction.
So you just like going before that for a second, like you were at MIT when you were 16. You've always been kind of fascinated by cryptography, and it's a space that's not so simple necessarily. You had this exposure at a young age to many of the brightest minds, and you got to kind of see what they were doing. How did like that experience kind of have an effect on you as a builder? Like, did it make you more prone to taking risks and to trying stuff? Because like what you just described here, I mean, you just jumped in, got out of your job, and just did it. You know?
Um, yeah, it's funny as I guess as like you go through life, you sort of like hit these like pockets and where you think like, no, now's the time. So one thing I like to tell people is, yes, I went to school young. That's mostly a function of the fact that I was homeschooled. And when you're homeschooled, it's a little bit like a startup. There's not, at least like when I was growing up, there's not really like a path. If you want to do something, you kind of have to figure it out yourself. So you're kind of wired to think that way. Um, and I knew I liked math as a kid, and I didn't particularly set out with like a plan in mind. Even when I got to college, I was fortunate enough to take a cryptography class, and it's just like I got it sort of totally captured my imagination as well as many of the other folks who took that professor's class. Um, but cryptography is like interesting because it's basically number theory, right? And
Mhm.
the thing about number theory was until World War II, it wasn't considered a useful field at all. Like
Mhm.
people would call it like this, like they call it like the queen of mathematics. Like it was like just like beautiful and useless. And MIT didn't actually have a math department until World War II. So if you've seen Oppenheimer and like Vannevar Bush was the president, they instituted because it was modeled after German technical schools, and they didn't actually institute a mathematics department until they realized there was actually a use case for number theory, which was like
Mhm.
code breaking, basically, right? And so I think that like that practicality of also like seeing like really interesting things, that's maybe like a little bit of what draws me. Like I I've always liked math, but I've also always really liked building things and having results. And I think that for me, college like really embodied that culture. There were a lot of builders who also weren't afraid to think big. And that mentality was, already something I was on like as a kid. Like I was like, well, if I don't go big, I don't know, like what have I got to lose?
Right. Good
So
thinking.
but it's a little bit like uh it's a bit of a privilege, right? Like you kind of don't fully see the abyss, and you're kind of young and naive enough that if you're around other risk takers, you're like, let's do this, right? But I'd say that you need a little bit of that when you're taking something like off the ground initially. And in a market like ours, so if you think about security in particular, it's not generally a market you come into unless you're a second time founder, unless you know the space, unless you know the scene. Um, you kind of need a little bit of naivete and conviction and risk taking. You have to kind of have that belief like something better can exist here. And I don't really know why the other players didn't do it, but why don't we try?
So how did you get the company started? Like, so you were building it yourself, the technology behind it, and just kind of launched it?
So I had a prototype, and I was sort of like thinking about it, talking about people. As a result of that, like I kind of just like I don't know. I was really passionate about it. Anytime I met somebody who was like interested in the space or even not, or like in tech, I would say, this is like what I'm excited about. This is why. Here's this culmination of all the things I've cared about. And I actually was, no, I didn't really set out to have a plan. Like again, it was just like looking for those kindred spirits. And I ended up finding my co-founder at the time, and uh, they'd seen a product similar at Dropbox called Grouper. It was the internal tool, and so there was just like this like timing in this moment. It's kind of like the story with like the early customers. It's like, okay, guys, we can do this. Like we can actually do this, right? And I feel like a lot of the initial drive I brought as a founder was sort of like being able to like really like push back on that kind of like question that oftentimes a lot of technical founders have, which is like, if this is such a good problem, why hasn't it been solved yet, right? Like um, that experience again, kind of like you were saying, like both having been an engineer at startups and built it, and having been an academic, like I felt like I had like a realistic like reason for it. It's just like people don't have time. It hasn't become a big enough problem yet, etc.
Mhm. So once you did launch, I mean, first of all, even just before that, like how does the technology work? Like how does it all function? Like I'd love to just understand it more.
Yeah. So kind of the core issue with access is it's really like a field of unknown unknowns. Like people
Mhm.
have no idea who actually has access to it. You run a business, it's probably kind of hard. You can probably take a guess, but it's not
Yeah.
totally clear. And a huge part of that is because um, access is so fundamental to productivity that you just sort of add systems and you add things and you add applications and you just kind of keep going until you hit a roadblock, whether that's a regulatory issue or a business maturity thing, like going for IPO or bringing on a big enterprise customer, or sometimes a breach. You just don't really think about it. And so when you finally have to think about it, there's no way of actually like ascertaining like what the hell is going on, right? And so the way we're built is we kind of come in, we sit on top of what exists, we connect into a couple of core systems, and then we're able to start visualizing like what's going on. And we do that at a very, very deep level after the service discovery. And so you're able to kind of have this like effectively like this database of like what actually is going on with respect to access. And then the second part of it is when we have that information, we actually have these like really cool, like human in the loop orchestration flows that allow us to start like scaling and auto scaling those policies and those access policies, and then fixing them immediately. So that's like one thing that's kind of cool. It's almost like a self-driving system. It's like
Mhm.
actually like you come in, you're kind of this lidar, you learn everything that's going around in the environment, and then you have like these admins and companies who can finally start to orchestrate things, and then eventually they can start passing that over to machine in the loop, right?
So and how long does that process take? Is it very very fast to understand the system?
um from an engineering standpoint, like it's pretty quick to surface the data. I mean, it's synchronous, right? So like it's real time, it's continuous. um for really large organizations, just sifting through all of that data, getting the insights, understanding the risk, that can take like some amount of interpretation. So we build a lot of that like interpretive layer. That's something like we focus on, showing which signals show you different types of risk, showing what heuristics in your organization might mean that access is risky, et cetera. So almost think of it as like a fraud detection type of platform. And uh, learning from those insights and building that feedback loop, it's compared to, I guess, what it would take to try and figure this out. So what this usually looks like if you don't have anything like this in place is you pause the world once a quarter or maybe once a year to bring in auditors who like basically are detectives trying to like go through spreadsheets and like figure this out. Sometimes you have these legacy systems that attempt to do this, but they're still very manual. So in comparison, you know, we're talking about weeks, not months or years sometimes in these cases.
And have corporations like really seen now that they it's just easier to streamline security and now they just don't run into some of these issues because I mean like you mentioned around IPO, like I know you really have to make sure everything's secure before then. That could be quite an expense for a business.
Yeah, I think the market is headed there. So, you know,
Mhm.
there were a couple of high profile examples of this. For example, um, when it doesn't happen, like in SolarWinds case, like the SEC has a case about
Mhm.
like what's material risk to the business, and we're starting to see regulation come down the pipe that's like much more focused on like is access control like cleaning the house, and that's largely because of this fragmentation, because of this lack of understanding, because of this lack of ability to take action immediately. It just is this ballooning risk vector, like it's sort of a bomb waiting to like go off. um, and so we're seeing organizations take that more seriously from the ground up. The sort of commitment like that vendors have to promise is like, we promise you like this isn't going to be like some sort of insane like professional services. We're sending a bunch of auditors to you, and it's technology, right? Like it's going to work like infrastructure. It's like with software, like you know that GitHub is your source of truth. You know that that's where all your developers go. Um, Access kind of should work like that in organizations, and the next generation of organizations are getting there. For bigger organizations, they've been put in the unfortunate position where they've had to try and hack this together, cobble this together with a bunch of different providers. And really, it's a lot more like doing financial detective work. And so bringing in a product like ours that gives you that top-down visibility, like at the very least, like streamlines that process and cuts it down so you can start doing the actual work of orchestration.
Companies that work with you, have they really seen a big increase in productivity? Because if you deal with the access, I mean, that could be a lot of time spent on those issues, even just making sure it's done right. Once it's set up and it's automated more, it seems to be it can be more productive.
Yeah. So we have numbers. We've seen like kind of really meaningful change, like in the double-digit percentages where we're able to track it. But actually, the most like fascinating sort of metric is this is how something like this is infrastructure. Most of the time, people don't even realize it's the thing that's powering access because it just works so seamlessly. Like I have talked to end users at customers, like think like financial systems, et cetera, and they're like, Opal Security, we don't use that. We have like our own way of doing access internally. And I remember the first time this happened, I went to like the head of security, and I was like, wait, you guys aren't deployed fully? And he was like, no, they just don't realize like it's that's how access, that's how like intuitively like it works, right? Now, that's kind of like how it works in like the optimal case. Obviously, access is very heterogeneous and
That's
complex,
great.
and sometimes, yeah, I know, right? Like it's kind of like you don't think about like AWS being on; it's just on. Like you understand like how big it is when it goes down, right? Like, and that's how a product like ours should work, right? But there are a lot of like edge cases and complexity. Like everyone has different things they do in access. That's why we built that risk layer and we manage that, or we sort of analyze that organization per organization. But even then, like, we see that the bar has lifted, that people don't think about access as this thing where they're going to have to like make a ticket and then wait like, I don't know, days, weeks, and then eventually bother their friend who has that access, right? So step one is like, it's like eliminating like this like sort of collective like belief that that's how access has to work. And then step two is like, if it works so frictionlessly, like people can't even tell that it's actually the thing granting them access. That's great.
Yeah, I mean that's that's a good product when people don't even realize it's going and everything's just smooth. Um, what's kind of your like future goals right now? Like, what is your roadmap? Like, what does this look like for expanding Opal Security? What areas are you trying to get into now? I mean, of course, you want to keep bringing on more companies as partners, but what does the future of like products look like too?
Yeah, and this is like a really fascinating time. Like I'd say like with folks rolling out agents, et cetera, like security is really at the forefront of like every organization's mind. And because we fundamentally are trying to solve access, authorization, and who gets access to what, the who very easily and naturally like now expands to what do you do in a world where your business is like 5 human employees and 1,000 agents. And we're really well poised to do that. That's something like we've been working on, we've been rolling out, but like to really like be able to tell that story. Like this is ultimately why access is a security thing. This is why access is an infrastructure issue. That's going to be, I think, very big for the industry overall, like, and meaningfully change how products like these are built. The second thing is just sort of like continuing to kind of make that center of gravity shift. Access historically has been an IT and productivity issue, and more like people are starting to understand, like you mentioned earlier, what's at stake when you don't get it right and when it doesn't like sort of dynamically and intelligently update. So continuing to kind of drive the market there. And that honestly was like probably the most satisfying part about building this from the early days, to watch like the narrative like actually start to shift. Like that's very satisfying, because I'll tell you, like people actually told me I was crazy in the early days to point out this was a security issue. And then I think finally, like just a little bit on the technological side, it's security, like going back to that analogy of like kind of like being like a detective and figuring out what's going on. Those are the kinds of businesses that are really, really going to take off with AI, because that's a lot of what AI does. It pattern matches, it collects information, right? It presents like kind of what's going on. It can do a lot of that analyst work that is honestly like some of the hardest stuff to do in security, right? And so being able to like build that really intelligent layer is something like we've never been able to have the capacity for in the past, and is honestly like a huge bottleneck for a lot of organizations to building really great security teams that can do this kind of work. So, I mean, unless you're like a giant bank, you can't afford to have like the best of the best like hackers like figuring out like what's happening in access control. And I think all of that is going to change, and we get to be part of like the story to build those types of systems.
I mean, I would think also AI is going to really affect security and like the kind of things you're going to have to deal with from like threat management. Like you've probably already seen just all different types of stuff. That's maybe surprising.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know what I'll say there is uh I don't mean this to like scare anyone, but it's kind of a losing battle if you think you're going to be able to take on an AI red team.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, like for us at least, like Axis is in some level like it's almost like the physical hardware of software, right? And so like it's an opportunity to build the right guardrails for Axis, no matter who's trying. Like it's like it shouldn't matter if it's a bad actor or an employee trying to like get access to a system. Like the bridge should hold in the same way, right?
Mhm.
And at the very least, like if something goes wrong, you know exactly where the failure point was, why it was a failure point. So it's going to create like the advent of AI is going to sort of sharpen the points that we really care about in security, is what I'd say. And one of those points is like making sure we're building the right access infrastructure and the right access control.
Mhm. So just the last question I have, like, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for you? Like, what's kind of your long-term vision for the company?
Well, it's a great question. The way I have described this space in the past is almost like, you know, I think for a while people thought and building like B2B enterprise businesses was kind of boring. They're like consumers where it's at. Um, but we're going through a bit of a renaissance, and people are realizing, especially with technologies like AI, there's actually like so much innovation happening in building like enterprise technology. It like must be like how it was like when databases started coming to play, et cetera. And um, I think of identity and access as actually one of the last great enterprise frontiers, like to
Mhm.
really get to build an enduring business around that is what excites me and the team, and taking a shot at that, right? Like, I don't think it's easy, but I don't think building businesses is at the end of the day. Um, and so the next 5 years are like continue to like kind of innovate, build the best product, show people that this can be done, like rewrite the narrative. The To the haters who thought least privilege wasn't a thing that could be done, right? Like continue to show them that actually you can build these technologies, just like I'm sure there were haters for like self-driving cars. And I think along the way we end up building like the foundation of a business, period, not a product, not a technology, but a shot at building something lasting.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think it's so important to build a streamlined, easier to use system to secure companies. Every company wants to be more secure when it comes to access. I think a lot of them struggle with finding the right way to do that, and it seems like you've built something much better for companies to integrate, and something easy for their internal teams to manage. And I'm just excited to see how you're going to continue to bring it out and help more people with this big problem. And look forward to what's next. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ben.